Good evening. My name's Mick Napier, and this is part of our regular Sunday afternoon live interviews with people we think can contribute something significant to the discussion about the struggle for Palestinian freedom. My name's Mick Napier, as I said. I'm speaking on behalf of the Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign. We're starting a little bit late because we had a technical hiccup, but I'm very, very pleased today to interview Professor Nurit Peled-Elhanan. And to get the title of her book precisely correct, she's the author of an analysis of Israeli textbooks, Palestine in Israeli school books, ideology and propaganda in Israeli education. Nurit, welcome.
Thank you.
The situation that precipitated the invitation, Nurit, to speak to you is actually something in Scottish education. There was a scandal here a few years ago when it was discovered materials were being used in one county which simply described Palestinians as terrorists. There was a general scandal, the materials were withdrawn, and a group of teachers got to work to produce materials suitable for use in Scottish schools to teach the issue of Israel-Palestine. They were vetted, they were evaluated, found to be of sufficient quality, and then they were suppressed by the minister responsible. So that one thing led to another, and your name came into the conversation more than once, and we thought it would be very useful to interview yourself about the content of your book, about how textbooks deal with Palestinians and Jews, with relations between populations in Israeli schools. Could you tell us just basically the main thesis of your book, or what framed your beginning to write the book, Nurit?
Well, I was really studying scientific discourse in school books, and then I came across the racist discourse, which of course uses scientific discourse in books of history, geography, and civic studies. And then I wrote this book about Palestinians. But of course, Palestinians are only one group against which racist discourse is used in Israeli school books. There are other groups of Jews, like Mizrahi Jews who came from Arab countries, Arab Jews, and Ethiopian Jews who are also treated in a racist way. But Palestinians are the most important one and the most discriminated one, either in the textbooks or outside. So I decided to dedicate a whole book to that.
Before we talk about the content of the books that you've identified and analysed, is it British state education is divided by class, by allocation of resources. In Israel, do you have a unified education system for Jews and Arabs, or is it segregated? Is it supposedly separate and equal, or is it separate and unequal in terms of investment and so on?
We have state secular and state religious Jewish schools. There is one stream of education which is independent, and this is the ultra-Orthodox Jews. They have their own program. And the Arab education is sponsored by the Ministry of Education, which is mostly Jewish. There is a committee that decides about Arab education, but most of its members are Jews. I think there's only one Arab member. The Arabs, what is called the Arab sector, are discriminated in education, in budgets, and things like that. They don't receive the fair share of the budgets. They are 20, 25% of the population. I don't think they get 5% of the budget. The books they study are the Jewish books translated to Arabic, which means they study about the big Zionist project.
Could I just interrupt you? The ratio is not 5 to 4. The way you're talking there, in terms of allocation of resources, it's about 5 to 1 in terms of allocation for schools between Jews and Arabs. Have I got that right?
well, they get, instead of getting 20-25%, they get 4 or 5% of what they deserve. Yeah. And the conditions are horrible. Most teachers, they are appointed, headmasters are appointed, and but I suggest you don't talk to me about it, because I'm not expert on Arab education in Israel. I'm studying Jewish education. The expert is Dr. Samira Alayan, who just published a very important book in Routledge about education in East Jerusalem, but she has another book about Israeli Arab education, and she has all the figures. I don't want to get to make a mistake here, so you can talk to her later and ask her about that. But what I know from her, what I know from what I read and from what I see and from what I know, is that they study the same content as the Jewish schools, and they don't have such a variety of books as we have, but one book for each subject, for each class, and this is what they have to study. They don't study anything about the Palestinians. They don't study their own history. They don't study their own culture, their own literature, their own poetry at all. Okay? And of course, they have to study about the Holocaust and even be examined on it, what Jewish children don't have to do. And it's very strict, it's very narrow, and that's the way it is.
I tried to send an email to Professor Alai, or to your colleague Alayan, yes, a few weeks ago. Perhaps you could ask her to that she got it. I'm having some communication problems. I'm in China at the moment, and I'm working through various firewalls. We would very much like to interview her at some stage now.
Yeah, sure.
Yep. So back to Jewish education then. How are Arabs portrayed? How are Palestinians portrayed in Israeli textbooks for Jewish kids? Are they pre-modern, barbaric? Are they a barrier to civilization, or what? Have I got that wrong?
Well, they are portrayed, first of all, in categories. I mean, not individually. As in racist discourse, usually, there are categories. They are problems. They are portrayed as problems that Israel has to cope with: a refugee problem, developmental problem, terrorist problem, and so on. They are portrayed as primitive and vile, as people who have to be kept from invading our lands. And not much is said about them, really. They are usually absent. I mean, my book was published in 2012, but today the books are much worse. They're hardly mentioned, only very, very theoretically, as, you know, the enemy we have to face or something like that, but there's nothing about them. You don't know anything about them. And visually, you don't find, and there are hundreds of books in Israel. Some of them are called the Arabs of Israel, or the Arabs in the area. And you don't find one photograph of an Arab person as ourselves. I mean, as a modern, educated, normal, let's say, Western-looking Arab. Visually, they are always portrayed as some kind of Alibaba with a camel, and that's it. When they talk about, for example, Israeli economy, Israeli science, Israeli literature, Israeli theater, or cinema, you never see even one Israeli Arab name. Although the Israeli Arab cinema is one of the best in the world today, we don't know anything about it through the textbooks. And you don't know anything about literature or about anything else, or their share in science and technology and so on.
We had quite a political clash here in Scotland over Israeli state sponsorship of artists and events at the Edinburgh Festival, the biggest arts festival in the world. And part of the response of the pro-Israel crowd, quite a bunch in Scotland, you don't want, that would be another issue. But they brought over a Druze chef, they brought over a Bedouin to sit in a tent. they brought over a Palestinian of some other stripe, and the image they presented was of a vibrant multicultural society where every section of the population was valued, as opposed to the enemy, the savages on the border. Would you like to comment on that, Nurit?
Well, the Druze and the Bedouins, since they go to the army, are considered equal citizens. Of course, they are not. There are a lot of problems with their rights. They don't get their civil rights. They don't get any sort of right, their human rights. Of course, they get more than the Palestinians, but again, it has to do with their service in the army. And there's a whole struggle now of the Bedouins, whose villages are being evicted and cleansed daily, and the Druze who don't get the municipal rights that the Jews get to expand, to build, and so on and so forth. So they are really second, third, fourth class citizens. But they are, the trophy the Israelis show you because they can be in the Knesset and they have some political rights, but they don't have any national or cultural rights. And of course, what they show you is some kind of folklore that is still there, but they don't show you the problems of the Druze and the Bedouins in being integrated into the society, because they are not, mostly. The Druze are integrated in the army. They are used to terrorize Palestinians. And the Bedouins are used as all kinds of jobs, but it's really only about the army. There's nothing after, there's nothing before the army that can make them equal, or that makes them equal to Israeli citizens. And also in textbooks, of course, you see a Druze praying and Bedouin on a camel. You don't see Bedouin doctors, you don't see Bedouin professors, you don't see Bedouin surgeons, and you don't see Druze head of departments in the university or in hospitals or wherever. Some of them succeed to really cross the barriers and get somewhere. But you never see that in textbooks, and nobody knows about it, anything. All they know about is some, scraps of folklore, which are really not the real picture. So there's no multiculturalism in Israel. It's true that we have a lot of cultures, a lot of languages spoken, but this is not the policy. The policy is not multicultural. The policy is monocultural, monolingual, and it's all about the Jews. Even, holidays, they let them one holiday a year or two holidays a year, the Muslim and Christian students to take a day off, but it's not celebrated anywhere. Neither Christmas, nor any Muslim holiday. It's not celebrated officially, not in colleges, not in schools, not in the university, where you have so many students. In a teacher college where I teach, more than half of the students are Arab, Muslim, and Christians, and none of it is really foregrounded or celebrated or even seen on the ground. It's like they are invisible. So this picture that they try to portray is really propagandistic, and they want to conceal the fact that this country is not democratic in any way.
Well, South Africa, there was a rude democracy for white people. I'm sure there's democratic contestation for Jews, but I believe the Arab parties, according to political convention, should never form the basis of a political majority. Is that right?
The Arabs?
Yeah, the Arab parties. So, for example, in Northern Ireland, Catholics had a vote, but a fat lot of good it did them. In Israel, Palestinians have a vote for the Knesset, but I believe the Arab parties it would be a scandal if a political majority was partly based upon Arab parties against other Zionist
Never.
parties. Have I got that right?
Never, never. There was never any coalition with Arab parties. And yes, Palestinian citizens have the right to vote. Yes.
Yeah.
But nobody, in the last elections, the joint party received a lot of voices. They had 13%, but nobody make any coalition with them. No, it's unheard of. Never.
Yeah, I saw the political promotional film for the left-wing candidate. I forget his name, but he was boasting about how many Arabs he had killed.
How many? Yeah, in Gaza. Yeah. Well, that's it. Left or right. I mean, they're the same, and they believe, and rightly so, that the more they show, the more brutality they show towards Palestinians, the more chance they have to be elected. Yes.
Can you comment on that, Nurit, a bit further? Because it seems a little bit mad to anybody listening to make the point that the left and the right, one's as bad as the other. Now, I'm not a fan of the Labour Party in Britain, but the idea that the left is as bad as the right needs some explanation. I'm sure you're right, of course, but it's a weird situation.
Well, I'm not a political scientist, and I don't like to talk about politics, but really they're all the same. If you see Ehud Barak and Bibi Netanyahu and these guns, they are all the same. I don't know what is left about them anyway. They call themselves left.
No, you're right.
Zionist left is an oxymoron, you know.
Let me come back to education. Let's come back to education. Education is too important to be left to honest purveyors. The state has to have an interest in education. My son came back from school one day and said he'd been taught that World War I was really because of the bad attitude of the Kaiser, and he had a bad arm, and it was, he was just a child, but that's what they were teaching in schools. So how does the Israeli education system deal with the Nakba, with Zionism that saw all Jews before the Holocaust as really needing to leave Europe because the whole world is incurably anti-Semitic? How is that dealt with in the curriculum for Jews, for Jewish kids?
Well, the idea that Jews should live in the land of Israel is a given. It's the ideological basis of everything. Jews should come back to Israel, to the land of Israel, because they have yearned for Israel for 2,000 years. This myth is presented as historical fact. Nobody talks about the Nakba. Nobody is allowed to talk about the Nakba. They do write about refugees from both sides as a result of the war, which we did not initiate, of course. And they say we had to deal with the refugees from Arab countries, but the Arab countries did not want to deal with the refugees from Israel, so it's their fault, whatever happens. This is more or less what they say. But nothing much is said about that. And, the maps are the maps of the greater Israel. You don't see the green line, you don't see the West Bank as a different entity, and so on and so forth. So people don't really know anything about it. And they are much more pedantic about it in Arab schools than in Israeli schools, in Jewish schools.
Much more insistent.
Much more insistent. Yes, but in Israeli schools you can say there was Nakba, and sometimes they say that what we call the War of Independence, they call the catastrophe because they had to leave. They wanted to leave. They were afraid. They fled. Panic flight. This is the expression always. Panic flight. But in the Arab school, they're not even allowed to say that.
So what about the attitude? What about the attitude to Jews from Arab countries? They tend to be a basis of the political right, but how are they seen in Israeli school books?
In a racist way. The story that is told is that they were for 2,000 years subjected to pogroms and discriminations in Arab countries until the Zionist movement came and saved them. They're really, they want to convince them they had a Holocaust as well, which is funny because in Libya and in Tunisia, there was Holocaust, and this is never mentioned. Today it's mentioned, but for many years it hasn't been mentioned. On the other hand, they want to convince them that Arabs treated them just like, Ukrainians treated the Jews with pogroms and so on, which is not true. And anyway, they lived in a very primitive environment, and we saved them and educated them and so on and so forth. The attitude towards them was terribly racist, and they even recruited psychologists to prove that the mind does not function as the European Jewish mind, okay? And that they're unable of abstract thought and so on and so forth. And they were all directed to vocational schools. And today, of course, there is a generation of Mizrahi, of Arab Jews, intellectuals who defy it, who fight against it. I don't know if you know names like Ella Shochat, or Yuda Shenhav, or Sami Shitrit, all these people. But still in school books, they are treated anthropologically. They never had history. You see, history is always European Jewish history. In Arab countries, they didn't have history. They treated as the Aboriginals, treated in your books, I think. Okay, anthropologically, what they ate, what they wore, and so on. So there's a long way to go. Of course, the affair of the kidnapping of Yemenite children goes into it, and so on and so forth. And none of this is mentioned in school books. They said that, because of the differences in culture and the mentality, they suffered a little bit from discrimination, but this discrimination was by law, the same as Ethiopian Jews suffer today. The same system, it's the mechanics.
So without idealizing in Muslim civilization, after 1492, when Jews are expelled from Iberia, I think the Ottoman Porte rubs his hands and says, "Send them here, we'll take them." And Jews often held very prestigious roles in Muslim civilization. Does that have to be airbrushed out, or does it have to be turned upside down in order to show an unbroken history of horror?
Yes, right. Yeah.
Yep.
None of it is really mentioned too much. The idea is really that there is a sequence, there is a road from exile in Roman times to the resurrection of the nation in the Israeli state, of which the Holocaust is the peak of suffering, after which we were resurrected and redeemed and salvaged in Israel. They use religious terms for that. You see, so there's a whole continuum sequence of events that led to the resurrection in the state of Israel. And children learned that whenever Jews were in other countries, they suffered some kind of Holocaust, some kind of pogrom.
So an axiom of Zionism is that the whole world is anti-Semitic, not at the same rate, at the same state all the time, but we're all capable of a Holocaust at any time. Does that have to be applied then to the whole world, not just Europe? I mean, the European roots of Zionism are obvious, but does that then have to be applied to South America, North America, the Arab world in its entirety? What about China? Yeah, how's this? Are we all anti-Semites?
Everyone who is not Jewish is potentially anti-Semite and a potential murderer of Jews. Yes, we have to have a state with a strong army in order for them, whoever they are, not to be able to exterminate us again. Of course, today it's the Arabs. The Arabs are Iran, okay, the countries that support us. But in Holocaust education, for example, it's very, very obvious that even in the teacher's guide, they say the children have to understand that this is what happened to Jews because they did not have a state. Today, we are surrounded by enemies, but today we can defend ourselves. They make very strong connection and clear-cut connection from Nazis to Arabs. Of course, we are not angry with Europe anymore, and we forgave Germany in 1953, I think. Today, the Nazi roles are attributed to Arabs. They don't talk about China.
Your focus is obviously on Israeli school books for Jewish kids, but you must have done some comparative work. Is there anything unique, is there anything special about Israeli attitudes towards the natives, the Zionist bloc attitude towards the natives, that's substantially different to the demonization of the natives in North America, Australia, South Africa, and so on? Aren't they always dehumanized and shown as barbarians?
Yes, no, it's all the same. It's the same. If you look at South African school books during the apartheid, if you look at American school books, you know, the Indians were here and now they're not here. Australia and all colonial education and settler-colonial education, and especially uses the same categories to dehumanize and turn the natives into a race, a vile race, because this is the only way you can justify what you do to them. So it's the same thing. It's really the same tactics, the same techniques, except that for Israel it happens today when it's out of fashion to treat natives this way. That's all.
Could I ask one question? I'm old. I'm a year older than the State of Israel. I remember Jim Crow in South America. Black people were just not able to go to restaurants, toilets, and so on. But now we see a lot of black faces in Hollywood. A lot of for black people in Detroit, they might think they've been left behind. But the black middle class was to a degree integrated and allowed to share after Reagan and so on, in order to draw the fangs of the Black Power movement. But in Israel, there's no effort to integrate the Arab middle classes in that way, is there? Is that because the program is their ultimate expulsion rather than integration?
Yes, they are not subject of integration. We have two kinds of others. One kind is Jewish and non-Arab others, who are the Russians, who are not Jews. They are subject of integration. They can be molded and made to be useful to the state of Israel and take their part in citizenry of Israel. The other part of kind of others are those who are treated as a race, which means as a group of people that never changes, and they are not subjects of integration. They are not candidates for integration. These are the Palestinians. They should be eliminated in one way or another, distanced, eliminated, confined. Okay? And they are not subject of integration, and nobody wants them to be integrated. They are an obstacle on the way of a wholly Jewish state. Now, there are, for example, in my book, you can see a picture of a diagram of, I think, ages or marital status or something like that. And you see two groups there. One group says, in English even, Jews and others, and the other group says Arabs. So who are the others who are not Arabs? Obviously, there are people who are not Jewish, but not Arabs. So they can be integrated, they can be included in our group. But everything is divided to Jews and Arabs, even agriculture. If you see agricultural maps, Jews and Arabs, water, or whatever they deal with in geography school books is divided to Jews and Arabs. And they are others who should not and will not be integrated, and they are treated as the enemy from within. As I told you before, they invade lands. Why they invade lands? They're citizens. They can go and live wherever they want. No, they are invaders, even the citizens. So they are not candidates for any kind of inclusion, never.
They're slated for exclusion, permanent exclusion.
They
Well,
are
that's a very harsh form of racism. We have racism in Britain, of course, serious racism, but this is a quantum leap of harshness beyond that, isn't it?
Yes, of course. Of course, the less of them is better. The highest principle of Israel and in Israeli education is to keep a Jewish majority, by all means. So the right wing would say very clearly, let's transfer them, let's evict them, let's kill them. The left will say it more mildly, but it's the same, it's a principle that unless we outnumber them, they will destroy and exterminate us. We must outnumber them.
Palestinians comprise 25%, roughly, almost, or even maybe 25%, 1 in 4 of the citizens of Israel. Yes. That's a huge proportion. It's very similar to Alabama or Mississippi under Jim Crow. How do you keep them hidden?
All kinds of ways. First of all, you don't let them expand. From the establishment of the State of Israel, there are very few cases in which Palestinian municipalities and individuals received any permit to build anything. That's why they destroy their homes all the time, because they are built illegally. Then there's a law that does not let them have any kind of government or public governmental political jobs. The education is poor, and they're really encouraged to leave. If they leave, for example, for a period more than I don't know how many months, their rights are confiscated, social security and so on and so forth, all kinds of things. And then you have East Jerusalem, which is unique in the world, where people have no citizenship of any sort. Nothing. They are residents with no rights. And everything can be confiscated from them. You probably know that as we speak, they are evicted from their houses, are demolished and so on and so forth. In Bethlehem, a huge number of Christians have already left. So you don't let them access to economy, you don't let them access to jobs, you don't let them access to education, and so forth. So, and now all universities in Israel are in Hebrew. These people are not Hebrew speaking. It's very hard for them to succeed. So there's a whole series of obstacles that you put before them, so they will not.
Is the racism becoming more extreme with the passage of the decades? We see genocidal discourse, or we see ministers posting stuff on Facebook, which would result in a prison sentence, even in Britain. Has it always been so genocidal, or it's simply more open, or is there a greater intensity of racism today compared to the past, Nurit?
I think it's always been the same with nuances, but not so bluntly spoken. But it becomes worse. For example, they stopped the budget and the electricity to the most important Arab theater in Haifa, just like that. Or things like that are made, they're done in the open, and nobody gives even reasons or pretexts why they're doing it. So these things are really much more blunt today and much more freely expressed. But it's always been like that. If you remember the Kafar Qasim affair or things like that, it's always been like that, the military government and so on and so forth.
We had a talk by, my God, I forget her name, it's terrible, but a tremendous Palestinian artist who wrote a book called Drawing the Kafar Qasim Massacre. She's a very well-known artist in New York, a wonderful piece of work. It described Kafar Qasim in a very powerful way, very artistic way. A couple more questions. An American socialist, I forget his name, but he said something, a big guy in the 50s or 60s, he said, you can forgive somebody who injures you, but it's much more difficult to forgive the person that you've injured. because you look in their eyes and you know what you've done to them, and you kind of feel. Now, in terms of Israel, how successful is this? Or I hope you don't mind me using the word brainwashing, a very loose way. But how successful is this molding of Jewish attitudes to dehumanize the Palestinians? And how does it ever crack and more humane attitudes come through? Because it's kind of difficult to sustain with 1 in 4 of the population being Arabs. Is there any grounds for optimism?
Very successful. You can look at the behavior of soldiers and you can see how successful it is. How they kill children in cold blood, how they don't even see them as children, how they destroy houses, how they do horrible. Now they had this thing with a series about the police where they planted drugs and weapons in Palestinian houses in order to find them after that and incriminate the people. And it was found out. But people say, okay, oops, I'm sorry, like in a ping pong game, you know. So they are not considered as human beings, none of them, whatever age. So this is a huge success of Israeli education. When they, a few years ago, when they had this, what they call the knife intifada, where they used to really murder children who supposedly had some kind of scissor in their bag or not, you know, or a stone in their hand. And people used to come and photograph it with their cell phones. So this kind of indifference to human beings is, I think, the product of a very profound and successful, sophisticated education. Now, people who break down are the people whom you have in Breaking the Silence, for example, and you could read their books of confessions. It's the minute when they point a gun to a little girl and she looks them in the eyes, and suddenly they realize something is wrong. One very prominent member of Breaking the Silence, I heard him, and he said that when he joined Breaking the Silence, they asked him what was his experience with Palestinians. And he said, I never seen Palestinians. And he was there for 3 years, barging into houses every night, torturing people, killing people, do all the scale of torture and obscenities and atrocities that you can imagine. But he said, I've never seen Palestinians, okay? And something else that he said, I was educated both at school and at home, that whatever I do there is saving my country from another Holocaust. But one day something cracked. His story is that they were instructed to barge into a house, kill or torture the father, destroy the house, frighten the children, whatever. And then when they came back, the commander praised them for a very good job, and it turned out that it was the wrong house. And he asked, how are these people going to be compensated? And the commander said, it's none of your business, you did a good job, because it doesn't matter. And this was the beginning of his cracking. Usually it's really with the child. You have this wonderful book by Noam Hayut called The Girl Who Stole My Holocaust. And it's about such a story in Jenin, when he aims at the little girl's head and she looks at him. So such moments occur, but really too little, too little.
There was a recent story, Nurit, of a Palestinian worker, I forget, caretaker or something, who was accused of rape and kind of lynched in the press for a while.
Yes.
Fairly recently.
Yes.
That's very reminiscent of Alabama or Mississippi, where black people were often accused of sexual crimes. How unique was that? Does that happen from time to time?
It happens all the time, but this time it was found out that he was not the rapist, beyond doubt. And ever since it was found out that he was not the rapist, we don't hear about the rape anymore, as if it never existed. The real rapist was not caught. The girl doesn't say she was raped anymore. Her parents don't say a word. So it's really suspicious. From time to time it is found out, but many Palestinians are spent time in jail for allegedly rape Israelis, and you never know. You never know the truth.
I also read, tell me if I've got this wrong, almost a riot where some black Jewish kids were going to go to some,
oh, yes.
I mean, should I use the phrase white schools, for God's sake? It sounds
Yes.
Extreme.
Yes.
But
Ethiopians are very discriminated. There is a quota for Ethiopian children at school. Many schools where the parents don't want Ethiopians, they are not accepted. And this is even legitimated in school books. The school books write things like, well, what is mostly against the Ethiopians is their color. And some parents don't want the children to study together with colored children, so the municipality finds another solution, and so on and so forth. It's written in school books.
Does this racism not need to be masked? Does it not need to be made genteel and partly hidden? Is it so open?
They also say that they came from a primitive culture or something like that. You can always say that. But they really are controlled by the system from the moment they come. And they're treated in what is called internal colonialism. They are confined to camps, and there's nothing they can do by themselves. They have no money. And by the time they leave, even after they leave these camps of where they are concentrated, they cannot buy houses wherever they want. There are cities there are special neighborhoods where they can buy houses. So you have in the middle of affluent cities, suddenly you see a slum, and this is where Ethiopians can buy houses. They're really treated like blacks, yeah. And there is huge protest now because I'm sure you've heard about some cases of policemen just shooting and killing an Ethiopian because they thought he was a Sudanese. Sudanese are okay to be killed. And there's huge protest, and there are many interesting internet sites and blogs of Ethiopians who protest against this and who really call extermination and Ethiopian Holocaust the way they're treated in Israel. They really use these phrases, okay? Yes, they are very discriminated, both at school and at work and in the army and wherever they go. First of all, they are diagnosed. They are diagnosed for retardedness. All of them should be diagnosed. And then they are discriminated wherever you go. Wherever you go, they are discriminated, and it's in the open. And every now and again, a journalist finds out something, but there are much more than they find. For example, I volunteered for a long time in this center of Ethiopians near my house, and the children were superb. I mean, they were really. And one day when a family moved to another city, I called the principal, the headmistress of the school, and I said, listen, I want to talk to you about this child you've just received because she's super talented in math, in sports, in music, and you can really use, her to help children in math and sports and so on, and they can help her with Hebrew. And she said, oh, you are sacred, you are saint, and so on. And then she said, we care for them so much that not only the lessons are separate, but also the grades. And these are things that don't arrive, they don't get to be published. Okay? They don't get, and this girl, she was super, super talented. Now she's at medical school, but and then in the army, they are together. Okay? There are groups of Ethiopians together. She was working in hospitals, labor in the hospital, and then she had to go through exams to be accepted to nursing school. And she said she wants to come and sleep in our house. And I asked her, where do you sleep if you don't sleep in our house? She said, in a gym hall of a school on the floor. This is where they have to sleep and study for the exams. I don't think any other candidate for nursing school gets this condition. So there are so many things. And there are special programs in all hospitals for Ethiopians and Arabs. This is together for nursing school. Now, of course, the hospital get budget for that. It's all a question of money. But they have different programs of studying. Why? I mean, they're super intelligent, they're super talented, they get wonderful grades in their, baccalaureate matriculations, and still they're separated when they go to higher education in hospitals and so on.
I think race, it's really grim, but race science, if you could call it that hideous thing, always throws up anomalies. I remember in South Africa, visiting Japanese businessmen were honorary whites. You know, Mr. Honda and Mr. Suzuki, they were honorary whites because they had power. Yeah. So am I hearing that in Israel, black Jews are honorary Palestinians because they're black and inferior, to use that horrible framework? Yeah.
I don't think, well, first of all, they don't see the equation themselves. But yes, they are the second most discriminated group in Israel. And I was about to say they are not getting killed, but this is not true because they are. Okay?
No, I just heard you say that Ethiopian Jews, Ethiopian immigrants were being lumped with Arabs in terms of some training. But that seemed to break the rule that you've been describing for the last 40 minutes, where you have to segregate all Jews and all Arabs. It's an anomaly, is it not? Or is it just black racism trumping Zionist ideology?
Well, as I told you, there are groups that can be molded into being us, but they're not yet molded. Okay, the Palestinians cannot be molded, but the Ethiopians can be molded, but on the way to being molded, they are treated as second, third, fourth class citizens and employed in slaving labor and so on and so forth, no matter who they are.
Final question, Nurit, if I may, it's very close to my heart. After the Second World War, the British state kidnapped large numbers of vulnerable children from poor single mothers and so on, and shipped them off to white in Australia.
Yes.
And the Australian government apologized about a decade or so ago, and survivors started coming back, and the cat came out the bag, and Gordon Brown, Prime Minister, apologized. I have a particular loathing for that man. But the British did it in very large numbers, kidnapping lower class children in order to further the whitening of Australia. So there's nothing, I don't think it's unique what happened to Yemeni children in Israel, but it's pretty horrific. Could you tell viewers a little bit about that and how that might help them to understand the intense racism that you've been describing there, and then make some concluding remarks, if you would?
Well, the Yemenites were brought in order to replace the Arab workers. This was the reason they were brought. And nobody bothered to even see and inquire whether they know anything about agriculture, which they didn't, of course, because they were writers and goldsmiths and things like that. So the attitude was horrible to them. They died by the thousands, babies died, and so on and so forth. But one thing that was said about them is that they don't know how many children they have. And when you ask them how many children you have, they would say enough or something like that. Now, in Judaism and Jewish tradition, and in the Bible even, you are not allowed to count living people. Counting people means death. So religious Jews don't count to their children. But the Zionist clerks who came to welcome them didn't know anything about it. So this was one thing. And the other thing was that they were very primitive. They didn't know anything. They didn't know how to be parents. They didn't know, they couldn't read and write, and so on and so forth. And when there were couples, either from the Holocaust or American couples who wanted to adopt, there was a huge and apparently institutionalized kidnapping of children. They would ask them to come for medical examination and say to the parents that they died. Now there is a huge book that came out by academics that proved that it was really institutional. Because the people who deny it say maybe it was random, maybe here and there, but it was not institutionalized. Some people claim it was and even prove it. They say that most of them, some of them were adopted in Israel, but most of them were sold to Jewish people in America. And the money was used to finance whatever, I don't know. So there's a huge discussion in Israel about it, and it has been going on for many years. There were many committees, but today they proved that the committees were biased and dishonest and concealed evidence, and a forensic institution cooperated with it, and so on and so forth. There's a very important medical anthropologist,
Not one in 1,000 British people knows about what I just mentioned to you, Nurit. It's covered over here as well. I'm seeing parallels between the very substantial traffic, the state kidnapping of large numbers of children. The parallels are enormous. The mothers told the children had died. The children told the mothers didn't want them. And it's probably worse in Britain. They were sent for economic and sexual exploitation in Australia. They were used by the Catholic Church as slave labor and so on. So I'm seeing parallels in both cases, utterly horrific state trafficking of children. And you're saying there was even finance involved here.
Yes, and in Canada too, by the way.
Yes.
And today they reopened the archives, and there is a huge war between those who still deny it, and those who prove that it really happened. And I know a few cases myself, okay, of children who were kidnapped, people that I know. But as I told you, this anthropologist, Meira Weiss, she wrote a book about it. It's called On Their Dead Bodies. And many people, and now this book that came out, and people who testify. But the thing in Israel is that you can do whatever you want. You can protest, you can write, you can prove, but nobody cares. The authorities never pay attention. You can say whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. It's a democracy, but nobody cares. So for them to really prove it and get compensation for it, I don't know what will happen. But the stories are there, the proof is there, and the studies are there. And I think it will go on and on, because really nobody cares. Nobody cares here about anything. It's a very strange thing. People ask me all the time, how can you say what you say and not be afraid, and so on? Nobody cares. Basically nobody cares. They go on with their thing, and we are really impotent as much as we protest and write and speak.
The state has its ramparts, and it can allow a few people like you outside the wall shouting. Yeah,
sure. Me and people who are more important than me. Yeah.
But what you've had to say, Nurit, will take root among some of our viewers. We often get a few thousand views, and we'll take what you've said and promote it, propagate it, make sure people know about it. And especially educators, we want Scottish teachers to know that when we call for BDS, the Palestinian call, the argument that you will be isolating the best elements, the academics, the teachers and so on, who are so strongly anti-Zionist, we'll make sure that those arguments are challenged. Any concluding remarks, Nurit, about the racism that's at the core of Israeli settler colonialism?
Oh, I don't know. Well, right now I'm working on a book in which I will explain how Holocaust education in Israel is a very prominent part of this education. And I hope this will make, I don't know, maybe people will read it. I don't know.
Don't make a difference. Make a difference.
Yeah, you know, we do what we have to do, but we cannot even aspire to influence, you know, politicians and big institutions. This is not what we have to aspire for. I think we have to aspire to tell our own children and the people around us, our students, which is very important, to show them things as they are, because I believe that once you know something, you cannot unknow it. And then you do with it whatever, you know, whatever you feel. But I see it in my students' papers that once they understand, they're very good in seeing things and analyzing things. I don't know what they do with it in class, but I know that, you know, every year a few dozens of people are touched, and that's the most you can expect. And really formulate some kind of life which is apart from politics, apart from the big powers, and that voices the voice of the unheard. And I think that's a very big challenge and a very good one.
Well, this is a time we are born, and we are so fortunate compared to so many millions. We have to stand up and speak. Nobody stands up and speaks better than you do. Thank you very much for overcoming the technical glitches at the start. So it's I'm going to say goodbye from Shanghai tonight to Nurit in Jerusalem, and to our viewers in Scotland and peppered well beyond that. Nurit Peled-Elhanan, thank you very much for agreeing to be interviewed this afternoon in Scotland, early evening in Tel Aviv, and almost midnight here in Shanghai. So thanks again, Nurit. And could you ask your colleague Alayan
to answer you,
to check? Well, maybe she never got it, but to say I'm really keen that she speak about the censoring of Palestinian books, Palestinian books, if you like, by the donors and the European NGOs and so on. It's very, very important topic.
Very important.
Nurit, thanks very much again, and good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Good night. Bye-bye. Okay, folks, that was Nurit Peled-Elhanan speaking to us from Israel. The details of her book are given in the notes at the end of this interview. I hope especially educators will familiarize themselves with the contents. I hope this interview has been useful. I've certainly found it stimulating, and we'll answer any questions that any of you post in the notes after this interview is over. So we'll finish now. The interview will be available. It'll be recorded, slightly tidied up to get rid of the technical glitches at the start, and it'll be available permanently on the Scottish PSC National Facebook page and on our website as well. So thanks again, and for the final time, good night to all.